As concerns over the coronavirus grow and some countries restrict gatherings, tourists are also changing their plans, some even putting their summer vacations on hold. Some airports have turned into ghost towns. The International Air Transport Association warns the outbreak could cost airlines as much as $113 billion in revenue. According to a Washington Post article, many travel experts and industry executives are comparing the current industry upheaval to that of the September 11th attacks because fear and uncertainty are driving consumer behavior and keeping people at home. To break down the economic impact, Heather Long joins me from Washington. She is one of the authors of that article and an economic correspondent for the Washington Post. Welcome, Heather. Thank you for being with us. So, did the federal government help the travel industry after 9/11? And is it likely the White House would follow that blueprint now?
Yes, that's exactly what they did after September 11th. It was controversial at the time, a bailout of $15 billion for the airline industry that went to some of the big names we all know, like Delta, United, American, as well as a lot of smaller companies, even some helicopter companies. So there was some controversy about that amount of spending and how it was spent. But in hindsight, it looks like a drop in the bucket compared to the spending that we're doing these days. And people are urging the White House to dust off that playbook and do it again now.
And how is White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow responding to this? What is he saying about assisting these industries that are facing potential economic turmoil because of this coronavirus?
Part of the reason we're seeing this almost unprecedented market situation today with this massive oil drop, the stock market sell-off, and in particular the bond market really signaling a recession is because the White House has been very hesitant to take broad-based action. In particular, Larry Kudlow, the National Economic Council leader, was on TV on Friday really downplaying the need for anything. He said he only wanted to do targeted relief. So that opened the door a little bit to potentially doing something for airlines or for hotels and other tourism companies. But the problem they're facing today at the White House is the list of companies that need help is growing and growing. Overnight, we saw this massive plunge in the oil market. Now we have oil selling for less than $30 a barrel, something that a lot of energy companies would go bankrupt in the United States if prices stay at that level. So the question becomes, how many industries do you bail out? The list and problems are growing, and the White House, the president will be back at the White House around 3:30 p.m. this afternoon, and one of the first things on his list is meeting with the economic team and trying to figure out what can be done.
And how is Kudlow's messaging on the coronavirus differing from what most independent economists are forecasting?
Well, Larry Kudlow used to work for Ronald Reagan back in the 80s. He's a big fan of what's called supply-side economics. So he really doesn't believe in these broad-based stimulus packages unless they're a tax cut. So he doesn't really believe in, giving money to, say, consumers to help encourage them to go out and spend, which is what we did after 2008 as well as after 9/11 to try to boost the economy. So we've done it under Democrats, we've done it under Republicans. But one of the top economic advisors in the country right now just doesn't believe in that. He argues it doesn't work. And most people say the evidence shows otherwise, that it does work. And so that's one of these fundamental debates that's going on in the White House right now is all these outside economic advisors, including Republicans, are telling the White House you need to do something, you need to take decisive action and significant action. But your key player, Larry Kudlow, is saying it's not necessary.
And of course, all of that adds to the uncertainty that the markets just don't like. So Heather, can you give us an idea of just how large the travel and tourism industry is and how many jobs could be impacted?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're talking 6 million jobs in this industry. In terms of the overall economy, it runs 3 to 4% of the economy. That might sound a little small. I mean, obviously, the United States is a huge country, but the problem, of course, is that certain parts of the country, you could think of Orlando, Florida, Las Vegas, Nevada, in those places, it's a much, much larger part of their local economy. So you get into these problems of parts of the economy in certain regions are really feeling deep pain, and that's similar to what we saw in in the aftermath of, say, 2008, where parts of the country that were hard hit by the housing downturn just struggled for years to come back. And so that's what you're trying to avoid, this downward spiral in key cities.
And then, of course, there are ripple effects in other industries. With fewer passengers, airlines' demand for oil goes down, and we also know that suddenly oil has become very cheap. Will this have a ripple effect on the global economy?
It already is, and that's why there's so much concern of a recession. Is initially when all of this started, everyone was worried about the fact that parts and goods weren't being shipped from Chinese factories to the United States and Europe and other parts of the world, so it was what we call a supply shock. Well, that is quickly morphing into what's known as a demand shock. So literally people are afraid to, are being told to stay home, work from home, not leave their houses, and not spend. And so you've seen situations, certainly in places really hard hit like Seattle, where people are not out in restaurants. That means those waiters and waitresses, they're not getting paid, they're not earning those tips, and those people are not turning around and spending as much as they normally would. And so it sort of starts this downward spiral of people pulling back on their spending, and then that puts jobs at risk. And that's what everyone's really afraid of right now. And you see a lot of push on the Democratic side from Congress to do some sort of sick pay, to try to extend some payments or some unemployment benefits to people who are gig economy workers or people who don't have sick pay in restaurants and other industries right now, to try to give some money, give some cash so people just don't, literally you could see where the economy could come to a standstill if everyone just stopped spending.
Right now, so is there any industry not being negatively impacted by the coronavirus? Or, conversely, are there some industries that this is actually benefiting somehow?
Yeah, I was just looking that up right before we spoke. There is some benefit. It probably won't surprise anyone to hear these names. Clorox is doing well. Netflix is doing well. Campbell's Soup, everyone's stocking up on their soup, is doing well. Obviously, we've all been rushing to buy Purell and other types of cleaning products, online education groups. So yes, those things that you do when you stay at home and don't know what else to do.
The items you would take with you into the bunker, right?
There you go. I like that. Bunker stocks.
So you have another article detailing how the White House and feds are at odds about handling this. You write that the policymakers steering the government through this crisis have less expertise than the people involved in past financial panics like 2008. So walk us through how the response of today's policymakers is differing from the key players in the 2008 crisis.
I think one of the easiest ways to think about it is former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, who was there in the late 90s during the Asian financial crisis when everybody was worried about that spilling around the world. He was also there in 2008 during that Great Recession. And he told me this, and I thought it really stuck with me. He said, the Treasury in both those periods, the Treasury and the Federal Reserve, so our key economic policymakers, they would have been on the phone multiple times a day, 5, 6, 7 times a day. Their staffs would have been working closely together. And you just don't see that right now. You have the Federal Reserve, which has cut interest rates already last week, and they're sort of putting up their hands saying, come on, where's the response from the Treasury? Where's the response from Congress? And meanwhile, you have the White House looking at the Fed. All Trump has done so far mostly is call for more Fed rate cuts, interest rate cuts, and most economists are just pulling their hair out because lower interest rates is not really what's going to save the economy right now. It's already cheap to borrow money. It's really cheap if you want to go buy a home. What people are really nervous about is they don't even want to leave their homes. And you need something bigger to deal with that problem.
All right. Well, Heather Long of the Washington Post, thank you so much for sharing your insight with us.
Thank you.